Welcome to this explainer. I am incredibly excited to be your guide today as we unpack the fascinating behavioral science behind elite team chemistry. Look, we've all been part of groups in our lives, right? At work, at home, maybe on a sports team. And you've probably wondered at some point, why is it that some groups have this undeniable electric chemistry where everything just seems to click, while others, sometimes with even more talented individuals on paper, just completely fall apart? It's like a giant puzzle. Well, today we are going to demystify exactly how great teams are actually built. Let's dive right in.
I want to hook you immediately with a really fascinating experiment. It was conducted by designer and engineer Peter Skillman. He set up this surprisingly simple, timed competition. He gathered groups of 4 people and gave them a somewhat bizarre toolkit: 20 pieces of uncooked spaghetti, 1 yard of transparent tape, 1 yard of string, and 1 standard-size marshmallow. The only rule? Build the tallest possible freestanding structure, and the marshmallow has to end up right on top. Now, he tested this with teams of highly educated, fiercely strategic business school students. And then he tested the exact same challenge with teams of kindergartners. So I want you to take a second and genuinely guess right now, who actually builds the taller tower?
Okay, the shocking truth is that in dozens of trials, the kindergartners absolutely crushed the business students. I mean, it wasn't even close. The MBAs built structures that averaged under 10 inches, while the kindergartners averaged a towering 26 inches. You're probably thinking, no way, how is that even possible? Well, it comes down to what psychologists call status management. The business students spent a huge chunk of their time strategizing, figuring out who was actually in charge, carefully navigating the group's hierarchy, and, frankly, protecting their egos. They were managing status. The kindergartners, they didn't really talk much at all. They definitely didn't care about who the CEO of the spaghetti tower was. They just stood shoulder to shoulder, grabbed the stuff, experimented rapidly, learned from immediate failures when the spaghetti snapped, and focused purely on interaction. They didn't work smarter individually, but they worked together in a much, much smarter way. That marshmallow experiment brilliantly illustrates the core thesis of Daniel Coyle's book, The Culture Code. We traditionally think of a strong team culture as this sort of magical trait, right? Like it's something a group is just luckily born with, like organizational DNA. But Coyle spent years embedding himself inside some of the world's absolute most successful organizations. We're talking the elite warriors of Navy SEAL Team 6, the creative geniuses at Pixar, the legendary San Antonio Spurs. And what he found was a real game changer. Creating a great culture is not magic. It's actually a set of highly specific, entirely learnable skills that are deeply rooted in our biology and our psychology.
So, how exactly do they do it? Here is our roadmap for the rest of this explainer. We are going to look at 3 actionable pillars. Skill 1 is build safety. Skill 2 is share vulnerability. And skill 3 is establish purpose.
Let's start with skill 1, build safety and the power of belonging.
We tend to think of workplace safety or team comfort as just sort of the emotional weather of the office. Nice to have, but not essential. But it's actually the very bedrock of a strong culture. To get a group of people to collaborate effectively, you first have to neutralize the human brain's natural threat detectors. Which brings us to an absolutely crucial concept: psychological safety. By definition, it is the feeling that you are safe to connect, contribute, and take risks without fear of embarrassment or rejection. Human beings are just incredibly attentive to interpersonal phenomena. Deep down, our brain's amygdala is constantly scanning our environment, asking one primal question: am I safe here? Will these people reject me? When we don't feel safe, our brain locks into protect my status mode. It's kind of like a scared guard dog barking at shadows and social threats. But when we genuinely feel psychological safety, the whole biological system flips. The amygdala shifts into connection mode. We go from being that defensive guard dog to a wolf in a pack, hunting down a target together. The million-dollar question is, how do leaders actually flip that switch?
Well, they do it through what are called physical belonging cues. These are highly specific, often nearly invisible signals that tell our unconscious brains, hey, we are safe. Professor Alex Pendland over at MIT's Media Lab did some wild research on this. He found that he could actually predict the outcome of business negotiations just by observing a group's body language for 5 minutes. It literally wasn't about the words they were saying at all. It was entirely about the underlying energy. It's about maintaining high eye contact, subtly mimicking body language, keeping a close physical proximity. It's ensuring balanced turn-taking so that everyone talks and listens equally, and displaying active energetic listening. Basically, it's sending a steady, relentless pulse of microsignals that constantly reassure the brain you belong here.
To really anchor this psychological concept in some hard data, just think about this number for a second: 117. Over an 18-season span, the San Antonio Spurs basketball team won 117 more games than NBA teams with players of the exact same individual skill levels. 117! That's not a rounding error. Statistically speaking, they consistently, almost impossibly outperformed all expectations. And a massive, massive reason for that success is their legendary coach, Greg Popovich, and his absolute downright mastery of sending these belonging cues.
Coach Popovich is famous for pulling his players aside to give them intense, highly critical feedback. But here's the secret. He delivers it wrapped in what psychologists call magical feedback. He looks at them and says, "I'm giving you these comments because I have very high expectations and I know that you can reach them." Just 19 words, but look at what it actually does to the human brain. It delivers 3 extraordinarily powerful belonging cues all at once. 1, you are part of this group. 2, this group is special and has extremely high standards. And 3, I believe you can reach them. It completely neutralizes the brain's threat response to the criticism and perfectly signals safety.
Moving on to skill 2, share vulnerability, which is really the muscle of cooperation. Once you've established that bedrock of safety we just talked about, you can move to sharing vulnerability. Now listen, I know this completely shatters the old-school corporate myth that leaders must always appear perfectly confident, totally stoic, and completely invulnerable at all times. In fact, attempting to look perfect all the time actually destroys group cohesion. We normally think about trust like this, right? First, we spend a long time building trust, and then, eventually, we are willing to leap into the unknown and be vulnerable with each other. But the science shows we have that completely backward. Vulnerability doesn't come after trust, it precedes it. Leaping into the unknown alongside others, raising your hand and admitting a weakness, or asking for help, that is actually the very action that causes the solid ground of trust to materialize beneath a group's feet in the first place. You see this counterintuitive behavior constantly in elite organizations. Take Dave Cooper, for example, a former commander of Navy SEAL Team 6. Think about the stakes there, literal life or death. After a high-stakes mission, Cooper would lead an after-action review, and almost always, he would intentionally be the first person to speak up and say, "I screwed that part up." By doing that, he instantly gave his entire team permission to admit their own mistakes without fear of losing rank, status, or respect. Steve Jobs actually did the exact same thing with his executive team at Apple. He'd walk in and start pitches by saying, "Hey, here's a dopey idea." It signals profound humility. It explicitly tells the team, "I need your input because I am not perfect." Harvard researcher Jeff Pulser coined a term for this mechanism. He calls it the vulnerability loop. Here's exactly how it works in real time. Step 1. Person A takes a social risk and signals vulnerability. Maybe they ask a dumb question or admit a flaw in their plan. Step 2. Person B detects that signal, and instead of judging them or laughing or capitalizing on the weakness to boost their own status, they move to Step 3, responding by signaling their own vulnerability. Once Person A detects that response, boom, Step 4, a norm of trust is established. The static of insecurity just gets cleared completely out of the way. It becomes a contagious cycle of deep cooperation, and it is absolutely required if you want high-level teamwork. That brings us to our final pillar, Skill 3, Establish Purpose, creating the beacons. So, you've built the safety, and you've shared vulnerability to create that trust and cooperation. Now we arrive at the crucial step of aligning your newly safe and trusting team around a shared, meaningful goal. It's about answering that persistent, nagging question in the back of everyone's mind. What are we actually doing all of this for? Elite organizations do this by building what are known as high-purpose environments. And they achieve this by relentlessly flooding the zone with clear signals that continuously link the present moment, what you are working on right this very second, to a much larger future ideal. Think of it like a giant flock of birds moving perfectly as one in the sky. They aren't telepathic, they aren't reading each other's minds. They are just all paying incredibly close attention to the same clear signals in their environment. Our human brains crave narrative. We desperately need to know why our current work matters.
Now, exactly how you go about establishing that purpose depends entirely on your specific domain. There are essentially 2 distinct types of purpose-driven leadership. If you are, say, leading a surgical team in a hospital or managing a fast-paced restaurant staff, you are leading for proficiency. You need people to execute well-defined tasks highly reliably. You want precision and 0 errors, right? But if you are Ed Catmull leading the animation teams at Pixar, you are leading for creativity. You need people to constantly experiment, take intelligent, weird risks, and learn from frequent failure. But here is the overarching secret. Whether it's a sterile surgical room or a chaotic animation studio, both types of teams rely on a relentless, crystal-clear communication of purpose to stay aligned.
Let's look at what this purpose actually looks like in action, out in the wild. High-performing cultures intentionally plant specific physical artifacts and slogans throughout their environment. These act as mini movies constantly playing in the minds of their team members. When you walk into Navy SEAL headquarters, you have to pass twisted metal recovered from the World Trade Center. It is an immediate, visceral, unavoidable reminder of exactly why they do what they do. Over at the Spurs practice facility, there is literally a giant rock and a sledgehammer sitting behind glass, representing their core motto to keep pounding the rock with effort until it finally breaks. KIPP charter schools constantly repeat the seemingly basic phrase, "Work hard, be nice," and renowned restaurateur Danny Meyer relentlessly pushes his staff to deliver what he calls athletic hospitality. Now, I know, out of context, some of these might sound like cheesy corporate catchphrases, but their obviousness is exactly why they work. They act as crisp, undeniable navigational beacons for the brain when things get chaotic.
And finally, culture is in action, the daily process.
As we bring this explainer to a close, we really need to completely reframe how we view this entire topic. Culture is not some static trait that just exists in the background. It is definitely not an HR document buried in a PDF somewhere. And it is certainly not something your group is simply born with. I want to leave you with this incredibly powerful summary quote from Daniel Coyle. Culture is a set of living relationships working toward a shared goal. It's not something you are, it's something you do. Excellence is a living, breathing process. It is built from the ground up, day after day, upon thousands of tiny, highly intentional interactions. It's the eye contact you make in the hallway, the mistakes you willingly admit in a meeting, and the core purpose you highlight in the most mundane moments of a Tuesday afternoon.
So my final question to you is this. What small signal of safety, vulnerability, or purpose will you send to your team tomorrow? Remember, you absolutely do not need to be perfectly confident, and you don't need some magical, charismatic personality to be a great leader. You just need to start sending the right signals. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I honestly can't wait to see how you decode and elevate the culture in your own lives.